Hi there, and welcome to episode 10 on the Let's Talk Wellness podcast. Today, I'm super excited to welcome our first international guest speaker from the UK, Roshani Hill. The vision of the podcast is to empower individuals with knowledge of holistic wellness and self-care by sharing experiences from practitioners around the globe. My name is Shalini. I am a yoga and meditation instructor, IIN health coach, and a Reiki healer. Today's topic, breaking the cycle, prioritizing women's health and wellness. Roshani is of the VitalWoman Wellness. Her mission is to redefine the modern day view of women's identity and health after having children. She empowers busy women to break the generational cycle by prioritizing health now to avoid illness later. This involves transforming their journey towards health and well-being by understanding any deep-rooted issues within their bodies, using advanced blood analysis, identifying gut issues, and hormonal imbalances. She is a health lobbyist and advocate for living in optimal health rather than accepting discomfort and health changes as normal. Welcome, Roshani. First thing, what inspired you to focus on empowering women in their health journeys? And how did your experience shape this mission?
So I've been on my own personal journey of going through a lot of health challenges. I mean, this started when I was really young and not knowing really the information, and I wasn't empowered to actually understand what was going on. And then obviously, my whole history is that I worked in a corporate setting. I graduated from uni. I did the whole thing that I was meant to do. I trained as an accountant. I got into the corporate world. I moved from Australia to the UK, worked in a bank, and I was completely burnt out. And I was constantly suffering from like fatigue, bloating. I mean, everything you can understand. Like, I went and saw a gastroenterologist who prescribed loads of medication, and it just always masked the symptoms. It never really solved the root cause of the problem. And actually, I went on my own healing journey where I actually went through of understanding from a holistic perspective what would help, from an underlying diet perspective, understanding the root cause. And actually, I got a lot better naturally without having to take loads of sort of, medication to cover the problem. But my whole journey changed when I had children. So actually, I was quite lucky that I ended up working in health policy and health lobbying, as my next job, because then I got to see, I guess, the plethora of information out there. I worked a lot on research, particularly women's health was one of those areas that was really missing when it comes to preconception risks or, risks around anything. Everything was all about men. So you think about the healthcare system, what is the data based on? Like, how can you make informed choices about women's health when there's no data? There's no research on it. So I felt like there was a huge gap. And then all of a sudden I went through my own personal journey of having a really terrible birth, and I had a really bad birth trauma situation. And then I returned to work. And ironically, having been in the health industry, supporting people with their return to work with cancer, mental health, and all sorts of things, there was zero support from me as a woman after birth. It's because there's this a huge taboo that when women return to work, they don't talk about their challenges. It's almost like, you're seeing that someone's going to sort of maybe fire you or not think you're valuable in the workplace because you're a new mom. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm not someone who keeps quiet. When I see a problem, I always want to find a solution to it. And I was just really shocked. And I talked to a few people about it, and I was actually completely shut down. And I spoke to so many other women in my similar circumstances who had given birth, but they didn't talk about it. And they all shared the same concerns. I thought, this is not my problem. This is a universal problem. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to start this business because there is a total gap in having women being heard. You go to the doctor, they're like, it's normal. It's normal to feel tired after birth. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. But you're not fine. In fact, you're just suffering in silence. And that suffering in silence is so sad because so many women fall out of the workplace because of it. So many women don't get the help that they need. And that is why, so many women have so many issues post having kids, and everyone just assumes it's just aging. It's not. It's related to the nutritional deficiencies post birth and the lack of support. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yep. And you mentioned you have kids. How old are your kids?
Yeah, so one's 21 months and the other one's just about to turn 4 in February. And I went
Wow.
through like, a really challenging, journey, and it shouldn't have been that challenging. But there was like loads of negligence in the UK in terms of like the healthcare system. I had my first child during COVID. It was overburdened, not enough staff. And that kind of really had a massive knock-on impact on my health. I'm someone who's traditionally kind of healthy anyway, but this is the point. What is normal? What is healthy? And this is what we don't talk about. And this is why my business is trying to sort of challenge that status quo.
Awesome. And I love how you talk about breaking the generational cycle. Can you help just explain a little bit? Is that just because of your cultural background? Did you observe something? Like what exactly does that mean?
I mean, the generational cycle doesn't just, I mean, obviously, yeah, from a cultural background, my background's Sri Lankan. I think from an Asian culture perspective, a lot of people just ignore health. They feel like, I remember telling my parents about how I felt, and they're like, oh, you're being a hypochondriac. Like, get over it. And I was like, well, that's not nice being dismissed when you have a problem. And then it doesn't help when you go to the doctor and they just look at the symptoms and they don't look at the actual, like, they don't ask any questions about your life if you're going through any stress. So it's always about, slapping a band-aid or plaster on a problem rather than looking at the root cause. And I just felt like this whole generational cycle thing, it wasn't unique to me. I started talking to other people from other cultures, and they all had the same experiences. It just came in different shapes and forms. And what I mean by generational cycle is that we came from a generation where they didn't have as much toxicity in, their foods that they have today. Our parents' generation, they did eat cleaner than we did. They didn't have all those disgusting, like, processed foods we're exposed to. And then all of a sudden, when we were in this, I mean, I was in this generation where literally the new kind of like processed foods started developing. And all of a sudden, it became normal to eat loads of, processed foods. But, the knock on impact is you have significant gut issues afterwards. You can't digest all of those processed foods. And it obviously is going to have a problem with autoimmune diseases, chronic diseases, all these things. And we just, as a society, we're always blaming something for our problems. And if you look at like our diet, it shouldn't, like, our evolutionary process, it didn't start with that diet. It started with sort of, organic meats, natural foods, none of that processed stuff. So as an evolutionary kind of situation, we have to break the generational cycle, because if we continue this way, our whole entire generation is going to be chronically ill way earlier than our generation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, I guess the other question here is then, can you discuss some barriers like women face, right, when it comes to prioritizing their health? And how can they even overcome some of these challenges?
I think the biggest barrier I see is that we've really normalized feeling uncomfortable. So, what I mean by that, like, oh, I'm bloated, that's totally fine. Oh, I've got a headache, that's totally fine. I'm super tired, I'm totally fine. But your body doesn't have a voice. The way it sort of describes discomfort to you is through its signs and symptoms. And basically, there's a phrase like, because I'm like, working in functional medicine, like, your body doesn't lie. Your body's telling you something. If you wake up every day with a migraine, if you got problems, getting out of bed because you're so tired, these are things that your body is telling you, and they're not normal, but society has normalized them. So, my biggest kind of advice to anyone is to listen to your body and don't ignore it, because if you do, it's just going to get worse. And unfortunately, like for women, as we age and we get towards perimenopause, those hormonal changes exacerbate all these underlying health symptoms that you've been ignoring. And so I feel like that is like the biggest piece of advice I could give anyone is don't ignore it and don't let anyone else dismiss you. So if you go to a doctor and they're like, it's normal, or they dismiss you because, they're really busy, they're not invested in your health, then seek another solution, find an alternative, go and talk to someone else. And that's why I do health coaching, because I'm there for people to listen, like, I'm listening to people with their problems. And most of the time I end up being like a pseudo therapist, even though that's not my job, because people just want someone to listen to their problems. And unfortunately, in the UK, I'm not too sure about the stats in the US, but it's an average 9.4 minutes you have with the doctor. Do you think they're really going to understand your problem in that time?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, well, you know what? I don't know about the statistics in the US either, just from a number perspective, but I do know that when we visit the doctor, it's, yeah, it's a super short, quick visit, right? So there's no way you're going to get to the root cause of things, right? Unless, like you said, you go to a functional doctor or a naturopath or somebody, right, who can actually help analyze, look at your maybe blood work or look at, more details, right? Even just your environment, like where do you live? How do you live? All of those questions. I think that's really what the whole holistic wellness aspect is. And honestly, yeah, at least the visits that I've been to, no, it's definitely probably around the same 9, 10-ish minutes that you're talking about, right? Is probably what it is. So it's pretty sad.
It
Yep.
is.
So, okay. And, what role does community or just, having a support network actually help women to even take charge of their own health?
I think it's massive. Like the one thing I think that I really struggled with, as particularly, I mean, in my situation, I had loads of, amazing friends around me growing up and stuff. But it was really funny. Growing up, I used to talk about my digestive problems all the time because it's something I literally suffered from when I was a teenager. And everyone's like, "Oh, be quiet. Stop talking about your poo problems. You're thin." I'm like, I'm not talking about being thin or fat. I'm talking about discomfort. And that's what I'm saying about the generational cycle. People just didn't feel comfortable talking about it and thought I was oversharing. The irony is now the good thing is there is a journey of breaking that generational cycle. People are more open about mental health, about talking about problems. And now those same people who told me to be quiet back then are coming to me now talking about their problems. And I just feel like there's a huge gap in terms of like understanding what your problem is, talking about it. And I feel like there's a lot that community brings because it gets people to talk about their problems and not feel like they're alone. So I always like I've got, for example, like a Facebook, women's health community where people can just share their concerns and feel like it's a safe place. What I really struggled with when I was in COVID, I didn't have that safe community for antenatal groups because it was all online. You can't really connect with everyone online as you do at work. It's not the same as meeting in person. And having that group of people who are like-minded individuals that can connect with you around the same issues is so important. One really good example of that is I was diagnosed with something called incompetent cervix. Like your cervix basically cannot hold a baby. So I was like on bed rest for 5 months for my second birth. And I joined this incompetent cervix group. It was on Facebook, okay? I mean, I didn't know these people, but I logged onto it every day. I was obsessed with this group because it was the only group that could relate and I could relate to in that really big period of trauma. And if I explained it to anyone else, no one else would have understood. And I literally became friends with these people, had no idea who they were. I never met them before. That community saved me. So I feel like when you've got like, whether it's baby loss or you've got a certain like particular problem, find that group of people that can relate to you because they can help you so much because they can relate to you and you don't have to explain how you feel. You can just be heard.
Yep. Yeah, I love that because, I don't know if you've seen this documentary, I think it was on Netflix, where it talks about all the happiest countries. And, one of the top reasons is just community living because they had people around them, right? And people you could go confide in or somebody you can go ask, about just things or just advice or just have somebody listen to you. And I feel like, again, through the generations now, right, we're already so far from family, especially, I guess I can speak for myself too, right? Just because my parents live so far away, right? Back home in Asia and India. And I'm sure a lot of us here live far away from family. So when you don't have that community or cohort, right, to reach out to, I just feel for women, it's all the more important to find support groups like what you're talking about, because otherwise you're just going to just sulk within, right? I mean, you don't know how to get that out.
Oh,
And it's not
100%.
always your spouse. It's not always just, a partner that you can just go talk about, right? You need something more than that.
Totally. And I think it's really important to be open and like honest about it because, one thing I noticed about women's health issues is that women don't talk to women. So how can a man know about what's going on when a woman doesn't even explain it to their mates?
Yeah, I love that. And can you share any success stories or just examples of women who have, transformed their health and, maybe just clients who worked with you, right? I'm just curious to know, maybe just one or two, but like, how did they come in and what did that journey even look like?
Oh, there's like, I mean, I have so many different stories. I don't even know where to start. So there's like a really unique example actually of someone I know who connected with me through, I mean, I knew from like, I don't know, 20 years ago. I started our job together in Australia, but obviously I live in the UK. We just connected for like 20 years. And she just saw me talking about my journey and she was like, oh my God, I completely relate to you. I've had two children. I've been on statins, which is for cholesterol, because, you know, a lot of Asians have like familial hypercholesterolemia and she had an Asian background. And I don't think you understand, like, statins is such a hardcore drug. And actually, cholesterol is really vilified in the conventional GP medical space because it's actually an antioxidant. I don't know if you know that, but there are different levels. There's a lot actually more liberal in the functional space. It's the one blood marker that's probably higher than like the conventional ranges. But when you look at cholesterol, so being on statins, it literally depletes your body of all the essential nutrients that you need, like CoQ10, magnesium, you know, all sorts of things. And that meant her gut health was terrible. Her, honestly, she had no libido. Her skin was horrendous. She had like fungal infections. And then I looked at her blood work. I was like, whoa, like your nutrients are depleted. And like, so she was really thin. She was 40 kilos. She was like the same height as me. And she's like, I just can't put on weight. And like, she has the opposite problem to what people are probably thinking, oh, it's not a good thing because, you know, she's going to get like osteoporosis when she's older. And I was like, you really need to go on a gut healing journey. You really need to get all these nutrients back in because this drug that you've been taking from such a young age has really depleted you nutritionally. Anyway, her story is amazing. Not only does she look phenomenal now, her skin's glowing. She doesn't have any like scalp itchy fungal infections. She literally has put on weight in a good way. She's actually been able to put on like weight, like muscle mass, because that was one of the problems. Like all those nutrients are literally depleted to the point where she couldn't. It was almost like, you know, doing the same thing over, like definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. So she just tried something new. I put her on this huge gut healing journey, and we had like as a phased approach. Like when I work with people, you start on trying to like really trying to get the nutrients back in, then you get them on the journey of health, and then you get them on the training, because for her she had to get her nutrients back in, and she looks so, like a different person. And I just was so happy to help her because she was someone who was like at her wit's end. Her family were medical professionals. She'd gone to the doctors and they just kept pumping her with these like really strong medications. And I think there is a time and place for medication, but when you're this young, like she's like, you know, only 38, I was like, you know, you've been taking this for so long in your life. Why didn't they intervene and see things in the natural way? Why couldn't you have done it through a diet and lifestyle change instead of throwing some really strong medication? Because one of the side effects is there was like fibromyalgia, all these other problems. And people don't realize that a lot of pharmaceutical medications, they deplete you from other nutrients. If you know what's going to be depleted and you can, you know, counteract that, fine. But a lot of people aren't educated about that. So that's a really good example. And then just another recent client I've been working with, she's got Crohn's disease. And I don't know if you know much about autoimmunity. Autoimmunity is such an unspoken thing. And it happens like 80% of people who've got autoimmunity are women. Yep. And it's crazy. So a lot of the women I work with have autoimmunity. Their blood, there's so many things in blood work you can see that have signs for autoimmunity. And it's always mums, I'm telling you now, because you go through so much trauma in your body and it's physically like traumatic for your body to go through childbirth. And a lot of women end up with C-sections. And, you know, it could be Hashimoto's, like thyroid problems. It could be like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, all those things. But this lady I was working with, she's like had part of her bowel even removed. And her diet was like full on gluten, highly inflammatory foods. And she was always having to go into sort of, you know, relapse remission. And she didn't actually come to me about her autoimmune disease. She came to me about like just post baby kind of weight loss. Because the thing is, even when I talk on social, people don't resonate with health problems because they don't think it's them. And then when I talked to her and I was like, hey, by the way, there's a lot of things that you shouldn't be doing with your autoimmune challenges. There's a lot of natural healing you can do. You know, I don't like believe in throwing loads of supplements unless I see someone's blood work. So I looked at her blood work and it was like inflammation galore. And you can see it all in your blood work. And all of a sudden, I put her on these natural things. Her diet totally changed. Cut out the gluten because anyone with Crohn's really should not be having gluten. It's like not good for you. It's going to kill them eventually because it's really highly inflammatory and it can affect their DNA and the way the cells repair. And she's like, I've never felt so amazing. She's like, literally, I don't get like, she's like, I've been feeling this feeling for so long that I just felt like that was normal. And then she's like, now I finally feel like what it's like to actually feel like not in a flare up. She just, for months now, she's like, I just like when you go on a gut healing journey, when you really get to the root cause of the problems, weight loss and all those things like become a byproduct of that. So instead of being everyone being obsessed and society so obsessed with like weight loss, if you go on an actual proper healing journey and understand what you're wrong is actually underlying, whether it's, hormonal, whether it's gut health, whether it's, bacterial, whatever it is, you'll notice that everything else works properly again. So if you go for that walk, if you go for the run, your metabolism back to you're not dealing with insulin problems because your body's functioning the way it should be. But in society, like I was saying, we normalize these really horrible things that happen to our body, and
Yeah.
we can't lose that excess weight or whatever it is because it's highly inflamed. And like if you're drinking like loads of alcohol and you're eating poorly, how on earth are you going to lose weight and get healthy?
Wow. Oh my gosh. This is super informative because, I mean, just a lot of folks that I know, and I know you mentioned just even with a lot of Asians, right? Because I know high cholesterol, I think it's almost just a genetic thing. And I know, quite a few people where they're put on statins, right? Like you talked about. And immunity that you also touched on, I just feel like autoimmune conditions are so common nowadays. So I'm curious, just from your, process of healing and helping these clients, is this a combination of diet and some other natural supplements that you prescribe? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, like I'm not a doctor, so I don't prescribe, but I just say these are what I recommend because they're all natural. Nothing I prescribe is like, pharmaceutical. It's not, I don't say prescribe. I always say this, like at the end of the day, I'm educating people about the information about their bodies. That's kind of my role as a health coach. I'm not a medical, practitioner in that sense. So I'll give them the information to say, like, these medications are depleting X and Z, Y, Z, and nutrients. Personally, if I was taking them, I'd be, probably trying, because supplements aren't there to fix the problem. This is what a lot of people don't realize. They're there to get you to back to the place where you should be. And then after that, when you're back to the place you should be, you don't need to use them. You could be having your food and diet as you should be as a normal functioning human being. But in society, like we're in, like, for example, the UK, it's freezing and cold all the time. Vitamin
Yeah.
D is not easily, absorbed because the sun's not out there. If I'm in, like, Dubai or somewhere else, I'm pretty sure I won't have a vitamin D deficiency. So there are things evolutionary and, like, there's no one, the one thing I always say is there's no one size fits all. So what works for one person may not necessarily work for another person. And when you mention like the whole statins thing, like, genetics, like there's this phrase in the Institute of Health that I'm with. It's like genetics load the gun, but your lifestyle pulls the trigger. So, people who just expect that their problems can be blamed on genetics, it's not purely genetics. I've got familial hypercholesterolemia, which is that cholesterol thing, and my cholesterol isn't above range. So I think it took me a while to actually get there because I didn't realize I had that problem. But I realized that my diet and lifestyle, because I was thin, I was eating more like fried foods when I was younger, and I just thought, oh, it'd be fine because I'm thin or whatever. No, it isn't because it was in my blood. So, it's not just because someone looks fit and thin, it doesn't mean that they're not unhealthy inside. And that's why health is only really measured by your signs, your symptoms, your vitality, how you look, like you feel. It's not how you always look.
That's true. That's a great point, right? Looks are deceiving. So that's
Yeah.
actually really true, right? You can't just judge a book by its cover, right?
No,
So
100%. And that's why blood work doesn't lie. Like you can't like there's if someone's like and if someone's telling me that they don't drink and they don't go out and whatever, I mean they I can see it straight away in someone's like blood work what their lifestyle's like.
gotcha. So I guess what are some practical self-care strategies, right, that you would advise for women? Whether that's exercise, nutrition, gut health, hormones. I mean, there's a plethora of things, right? Especially like you said, once you become a mom.
There are so many things I can talk about, but I think the main actual small thing everyone should know is like, we talked about in the old generation, like smoking was acceptable. Well, sitting's like the new smoking, right? We're in jobs where we just sit at home and we work at home more often than we did in the office because it's a new world now post COVID. And you don't get up as much. You literally, like, sometimes I'm sat down and, like, so sitting is literally like one of the worst things, like, it's going to be for the next generation. And it's like my kind of recommendation is like every 30 to 40 minutes, get up and go and walk. And plus, you're more productive when you get up and you're resetting. That is just the smallest thing I just like recommend everyone should do. But also, like what I was saying earlier, like listen to your body. And like there's this phrase in the Institute of Health that I'm a member of, and it's like you can only train as hard as you can recover. And what that means is that I've been running my whole life. I've always been a runner. I can go tomorrow and run a 5K and I'll have no problem the next day. If I'm asking someone who's never done any exercise postpartum to go and like run that 5K, they will not be okay in the next couple of days. They'll be taking a few days to recover. So when I work with women, it's all about understanding that person and not just about their symptoms, what's unique to them. And, I think like my advice to anyone who wants to work with anybody is, find someone who understands you because it's so important. And one thing that like really frustrates me about the conventional Medicare system is that I was never listened to. No one asked me the right questions. And females, for example, we go through so many hormonal changes, and particularly if you're over 35 and you can start symptoms as perimenopause and then you age. It's called a brain recalibration phase for a reason. Like the way that the hormones work in that stage is the same way as hormones working in puberty. And we all remember how like dysfunctional we felt during puberty. It's exactly the same thing during perimenopause. And it's so confusing. And if you go to a doctor and someone's gaslighting you or they're not like listening to you, it's really upsetting. And you don't want to feel, and you want to feel hurt. So I feel like my biggest advice is like to make sure that you don't like let anyone, push that feeling down. If you don't feel right, find someone else that's going to listen. Make sure you take care of yourself because you are responsible for your health, right? No one else is. And actually, my old job was in health wellbeing, but I worked a lot with life insurance and critical illness, and particularly terminal illness. And all those people who are like on their, last legs towards life were always like, I wish I did this earlier. I wish I listened to my like body earlier. And it was just too late. And it was actually it's quite depressing. I saw a lot of really sad cases. And a lot of people always think it never is going to happen to them. And the irony is that like 1 in 2 people get cancer. So within your circle of friends, more than likely 50% of them will have some form of cancer. And that's scary, right? Yeah. So if you don't take care of yourself now, well, fine, you'll just pay for it later. But it's up to you. What choice do you want to make?
Yep, that's great because like they say, right, when you get on board a plane, first put the oxygen mask on yourself, right, before you actually help someone else. Because if you don't really care for yourself, there's not much, you can add, whether that's family, kids, right, anyone for that matter. So,
Yeah.
and
And
especially,
oh no, yeah, I was saying that, yeah, and the other thing I wanted to add quickly before I forget is that you have to know why. Because I feel like if people don't know why they're going on a health journey, they never succeed. It's like, would you go and do your job tomorrow not knowing why you're doing it? You just have to know. Like for me, it's like that's why my kind of aim for like women is to break the generational cycle, not for them always, it's always for their loved ones as well.
awesome. Wow. Okay, so we've had an amazing conversation here, Roshani. Like, I've learned a lot from this, and I would love for the audience to know how do they reach you. Maybe you can just share, your social media channel or any other information. I'm sure I'll add this as well later to the podcast, but I would love for you to just share that information.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm on Instagram on VitalWoman Wellness. And yeah, you can find me on there. I have a website on there as well you can click on. So it's probably the easiest. I think that's pretty much the most active version of me. But yeah, Vital Women Wellness.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time today. I know this is, also all the time zones and the coordination of that, but I really appreciate you sharing a wealth of knowledge. I think it's super important for women to really prioritize self-care and really, like you said, listen to your body, right? And understand the why instead of just hopping onto something, right? Because
Yeah.
I think that's what's going to keep you going because end of the day, it's all about sustainable habits, right? You don't want to just, start something and just do it for a couple of months and then you're obviously stepping back, right? That's not going to be sustainable. So,
Totally agree. Yeah. It's all about
yeah,
sustainability. Otherwise, it's gonna be a fad diet otherwise.
exactly. Yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.